Welcome to Fresh Eyes on Older Neighborhoods. In watching this video, you are part of a Renaissance block, which is a block that the ORA hopes to partner with over many years to engage in incremental yet sustained improvements in your block. As many of you are aware, the city of Oswego has been in a renaissance over the last 7-8 or so years, in no small part due to the actions of neighbors in our community that are taking collective control over the directions of their neighborhoods, and we want to invite you to be a part of this movement. Most of us have seen the changes around the community, houses like this that have dramatically changed. Sometimes the changes are big, sometimes they are subtle. But in all cases, these are decisions that the residents themselves have made, in part driven by the confidence that they get to make these changes when all their neighbors are doing the same kind of thing. In being a Renaissance block, you're part of a movement that began in 2014 with just a handful of about a dozen blocks, and that with year over year we have been adding more and more Renaissance blocks to these groups, expanding incrementally while still sustaining activity in our already existing Renaissance blocks. And we're happy that you are now part of the movement. What determines where neighborhoods go, whether they get better over time or whether they decline over time? The ORA has a simple philosophy. Neighborhoods where the residents exhibit high standards of care and are good neighbors to each other tend to attract like neighbors and get stronger over time. Neighborhoods where standards of care are low, regardless of the reasons, tend not to attract new residents and lose the residents that they have. And as the housing values in these neighborhoods fall, they get in the range of out-of-town slumlords who scoop them up. Now, most of our neighborhoods are between these two extremes. They're neither perfect nor severely distressed. But neighborhoods don't stay static. They change over time. And the direction that they go hinges primarily on the decision that residents make about how they are as neighbors and the pride and energy they put in their homes. We've worked in Oswego for a number of years, and if there's one thing we've learned, it's that when neighbors collectively become intentional about strengthening their homes and about making their blocks a special place, great things begin to happen over time in their neighborhoods. These also include not only the community gets stronger and the houses get better, but as houses come up for sale, new families are moving in, and we also see many cases of former rentals being bought by new families and reverse converted to owner occupancy. It just works. And what's more, it's fun when you do it. Let's talk about how it works as a starting place. How do neighbors get together and work as a team to collectively make positive change be sustainable in their neighborhoods? This involves paying attention to the signals that our neighborhoods are sending. Do we think this house sends a good signal? Or would we rather it send a signal like this? How does this house send a signal out versus the way this house does? Or how about this one versus the way the same house signals now? So part of this is developing a vocabulary for understanding the signals our neighborhoods are sending and how those signals, ever so subtly, influence ours and our neighbors' thoughts about the future of their neighborhood, whether it's likely going to be a good place to live now and in the future, or whether it's less likely, and just as importantly, how those signals affect people that might be looking for a place to live, whether our blocks are a good place to move into. So let's develop a rubric to think about that, not in a judgmental way, but in a simple, dispassionate way where we can evaluate the signals that houses and neighborhoods are sending that play a role in determining whether a block will maintain its residents and attract new ones, or whether the block will lose its residents and not attract new ones. With the ultimate goal being to use this information to think of ways we can improve our own homes and blocks. One way to evaluate the signals that the houses in a neighborhood are sending is to categorize them on a 6-point scale, all the way from 1, which is sort of best in class, where they're just beautiful and show pride of ownership through and through, all the way down to a 6, which is a frankly distressed and abandoned house. Let's talk about each one in turn by looking at these 6 photographs a bit more closely. What is a 1 like? 1 is like a best in class, where there's just It's just truly beautiful. I mean, it may not be your particular style necessarily, but of the style of that house, it is beautifully cared for. And you can't imagine how you could improve on this house in every respect. It's one of those things where the owner just seems to obsess over its care, and those are typically ones. Twos, like this next house, are just like ones, but there might be a few small things that you could do to improve them. You could see here, this is a beautiful house, very well cared for, but maybe you could improve the landscaping down here, right down below. It looks like it needs a little bit of work to make it a one. Then we get into the threes and fours. Threes and fours are almost identical to each other except for one critical thing which hinges on a critical question that you're going to need to ask yourself, and we'll come to that. Let's have a close look at threes. A three is a tired looking house that clearly needs some work, whether it's some foundation work or maybe some of the siding needs work or the porch. However, the owner that is there is showing good positive effort. You see these small acts like landscaping or hanging baskets, these small acts of care that says someone is home and they care about their home, even if they're struggling to do so. What makes a house a three also is you ask yourself the following question. If I came back to this house a year or two from now, do I think it would at least stay the same or maybe get better? If you could say it would stay the same or maybe get better, then it's a three. But if you think if you came back a year or two from now, the house will have gotten worse, that's what makes it a four. And this is a house that is an example of a four. This house probably needs some work. You can see there's some unkempt bushes in the back and things like that. Perhaps the siding needs to be washed. But there are no small acts of investment out here. It almost looks like someone has stopped really caring about the exterior of the house, even though the house is not really distressed yet. And if you come back a year from now or 2 years from now, it almost thinks like maybe this house is just going to slowly slide. Left to their own devices, fours can become fives. Where they are frankly distressed, it's very obvious when you see a five. It's a distressed house, extreme peeling paint, broken windows, structural issues. A lot of work would be needed to recover this house, and most people would be unable to do it. And finally, a six is just like a five, except for it is probably abandoned. You see boarded windows. It looks like no one lives there at all. Now that we've discussed categorizing houses, why don't we do a little bit of a self-test? I'm going to present 6 houses in a row, and I'm going to ask you to try your best to categorize each house you see and give it a number on this 6-point scale. Generally speaking, most people will have a substantial level of agreement with these houses, typically scoring right on the money or being within plus or minus 1 point. When you see these houses, you can also pause it before hearing the answer if you need extra time. So let's go to it. What do you think of this house? If you answered a 1, you would be correct. This is probably best in class. It really is beautiful. The owner has done everything. They're almost obsessive about its beauty and pride and care. There's not much you could do to make this a better house. Let's go to the next one. What do you think of this one? If you said 3, you would be correct. It is tired looking. There is work to be done here, but you do see evidence that there's small acts of care. You can see the flag out here. You see that the hedges are trimmed. You can see some shepherd hooks here, and there's even a small hanging basket behind the scenes there. So this looks like a year from now it'll probably be about the same, or it could get better, but it certainly doesn't look like it's going to slide or get worse. Let's go to the next house. What do you think of this one? If you thought 5, you would be correct. This is a fairly distressed house. It's most evident in the porch. We're not seeing all sides of it, but you can see some severe deterioration up top, some separation of the beams at the top, mold and rot occurring on the porch itself. Along the side, if you look, you can see what looks like some of the paint's chipping off. There's a lot of distress here, but it's probably not abandoned. It looks like there are people still in there. So it's not quite a 6 yet. Let's look at the next one. How about this one? If you guessed 6, you are correct. This house is clearly abandoned and severely distressed. Let's go to the next one. If you guessed a 4, you would be correct. Now some people might think 3, but look closely here. It is not in severe distress, but it's tired looking. The lawn needs some work, but there's nothing out there. There doesn't seem to be almost like anyone home, metaphorically speaking. And it looks like this may be in the early stages of withdrawal, and perhaps a year or two from now, I could easily see this house declining. Let's go to the next house. This house would definitely be a 2. It's really strong, but you might do a few things to maybe spruce up the landscaping a bit here, or maybe just hang something outside, but a few small things to make it a 1, but this is a very strong house. Now, I'm betting that you probably were mostly on the money with each one, or were within 1 point of each answer. It's okay to have moderate levels of disagreement, that's fine, but generally speaking, the very high levels of agreement with the scoring system. Now at the end of this video, there's some bonus content where you can score another 10 or 12 houses or so if you're so interested to see how you do and want to get more practice. But you also can decide to just end the video right after these concluding comments. So what do we do with this information? Well, what we have found is in City of Oswego blocks where we have a lot of 3s and 4s in our community, and those are the ones that can benefit from the most from this approach. With very small levels of investment, it can go a long way to making the block a place of greater pride and greater confidence, and making the neighborhood better overall. It's also important to point out that when we're scoring houses, we're not judging the people. This is not being approached in a sort of moralistic or judgmental way, but rather we're asking simple questions. What sort of signals do our neighborhoods send? And how do we improve the signals that they do send so we enjoy living in our neighborhoods more, but so do our neighbors? So we're going to ask you to begin scoring the neighborhoods kind of immediately around you. Not your own blocks because you live on those and you're too close to those to be objective, but to walk a few blocks that are near where you live and see the kinds of signals those blocks are sending. It can also help you come up with your own ideas how small improvements can have an outsized impact and begin moving a neighborhood to a place of even greater pride and confidence.